Okay, good. Well, welcome back, everyone, and hello to our significant audience on Zoom. We've got a number of people. We've got standing room only here at Russell Books, and quite a few folks on Zoom. As mentioned earlier, my name is Lauren Daniel. I'm pleased to be your guest host tonight for Planet Earth Poetry this evening at Russell Books in downtown Victoria on the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen people. Before I introduce our two featured poets, please remember that we're inviting both our live and our online audiences to write poems in response to the poetry of this season's featured poets. So by season, we mean going back to last September. The call for submissions is now open on our website, and some of the submitted poems will be selected for Planet Earth Poetry's forthcoming anthology of response poems. And I believe we've got Caitlin Press lined up to publish that. So you can read all about it on our website, as well as our Poem a Month challenge. And if you're not a newsletter subscriber, please go on planetearthpoetry.com and sign up to keep in touch. So our featured poets tonight, both accomplished BC poets, are Al Rempel and Harold Rhenisch. Al Rempel is a poet and teacher in Prince George, BC. His books of poetry are Sprocket, Undiscovered Country, This Isn't the Apocalypse We Hoped For, and Understories. Sprocket is a series of breathless prose poems of the poet's childhood adventures spent roaming free in the idyllic setting of Arnold, BC. Each poem is a snapshot of one or two memories. Al Rempel.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Lauren, and everybody for coming out. And I want to thank Kieran and everybody from Planet Earth, and Zoe and everybody from Russell Books, as well as Harold, who wrote an amazing review of my book already, and Patrick Friesen for such a great endorsement. There's a few things you need to know. One is Arnold is a little community, used to be mostly Mennonite community, tucked in between Chilliwack and Abbotsford, up against the Vetter Mountain and the US border. You need to know that Lonnie and Robert were friends of mine only in summertime. And you need to know that I'm going to play some sound files, and so I will be holding up the phone to the microwave, not the microwave, the microphone, every now and then. So once we get all set up. We thought bikes were the best and would ride everywhere we could all day, the spokes turning in the sun under the watchful eyes of birds. Sure, mothers might try to spot us as we went flying past, but we had places we needed to be. The bridge near Mr. Colebrook's, where the best blackberries grew down underneath if you didn't slip and fall off the old water pipe, or the other way to the mountain pumping the pedals, where we once found so many tadpoles and frog eggs like soap bubbles in a jar, and where the old concrete stairs of the church were busted up and jumbled into dark places. There must be snakes in there. Don't put your hand in there. Or back to the church where we rode in circles in opposite directions for the chance to smash in a head-on collision, bikes upended and wheels turning in the air. No one was watching us, or so we thought, until Lonnie got his pant leg caught in the chain, and Tiny Gray's sister came out with scissors and said, "You can either take your pants off, mister, or I'll cut the cloth." Every summer when the days turned heavy and flopped down in the heat with my dog Chief between the shed and the barn, Lonnie and Robert and I would be friends because no one else was around. The crickets and frogs would sing to our dreams, the whine of hay cutting by the late night farmer's machine. We'd wake up to a new ache in our bones, waiting for the sun to light up our place in the world. Little heaps of metal and wood tucked into the farm. We pulled out a long wooden beam we could keep, spent all morning cutting a V into its front because it needed to be a battleship with wooden blocks as turrets, nails as guns. Bang, 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 we hammered them in and dragged it off to the slough at the back because what kind of afternoon is it if you don't build harbors in the mud with the microbes and the ditch weeds and the bugs? The best way to run full blast through the cornfield just before harvest is to hold up your two arms bent at the elbow like a battering ram so your face doesn't get all cut up. Sure, it'll sting like hell in the bath at night, but I've been there before, crawling through long grass or worming down a tunnel of hay to the fort Lonnie found in Dad's barn. All three of us huddled in there, planning our next attack. So what were we running from in the field? Was it the circling cry of the hawk as we went hunting for blackberries untouched by anyone else at the other side of the slough, the bushes dripping dark purple on our chins? So why were we running? Lonnie and Robert calling out somewhere close by behind the bladed green. Are we nearly there yet? Not yet, not yet. The wind would rip down our valley, the hand of God flipping barn roofs like lids, the chickens huddled together in the corner under the frightening sky, and tin would be snatched off and wrapped around the tops of the hydro poles like bits of crumpled foil, the power down, Mum calling out for candles and matches, and where did we put them from last time? Flashlights left by the door, and Dad laying awake one whole night wondering if he should take us downstairs, the eaves and the windows shuddering with the blast, the trees doubled over and swaying, but I slept fine. I always did. Woke up to toast and porridge over the news, twigs and spring flush strewn along the driveways, fields filling up into lakes past their ditches right to the road. So the next day at Robert's place, we floated a flat-bottom boat over a rectangular piece of sky, the grass below so smooth, so clear. We spent an hour just hanging there over the sides, expecting fish with bright scales to appear. When I opened my eyes, the world one winter morning was covered in ice. We went skating on the road in our rubber boots, the trees bowed low and touching the earth with gloves on their fingers. It was then that the wires sang as I listened, as I stood behind the window. The church was quiet. There was no choir. Mr. Dick, his face beat red, singing tenor. Mr. Schmidt, who still prayed in German, and the only hint he was nearly finished was the familiar lilt before the amen at the end, my cheek pressed against Mum's purple coat with the faux fur trim, my eyes on the reinforcement rods that held the church together, strung higher than the frosted windows. Oh, silent, oh, holy, more than Christmas Eve with candles lit in our palms, our honest faces in the light. I closed my eyes again. The wires were still singing their plain song divine. Can't guess what that is. Lonnie, Robert, and I used to pull up clumps of crabgrass on the laneway between the old shed and the barn, looking for pebbles the jade green caught in the roots of a wet morning, and clouds hanging low in the valley, a fresh smell of spring like a fence post propped up in a new hole. We were oblivious to the rest of the world. Mom in the house, even the cows, flicking their tails 30 feet away, sparkle stones or stripes and a deep purple and square whites, stuffed in our pockets, like the chestnuts I found behind the school, so smooth like turned wood. The next day, not knowing what to do, I sent them down the bus under the seats one at a time, like stones, until the bus driver saw them rolling past his feet and slammed on the brakes. Lonnie, Robert, and I stared at the aftermath, the trees that lined the church on two sides, 3 or 4 scraped up bad like knees on gravel. We put down our bikes to see the bark ripped clean off to the inner bone, the tree smooth with a sappy sheen, bits of metal and headlight shiny on the grass. We didn't fully know what a drunk driver meant, but we could see the pieces lying there, and Arnold, almost everything got said, but nothing was spoken. We tried to put it all together in our heads, wanted to take something home, even mangled and useless. That accident scene had the bright, glassy gleam of treasure. Our farm had equipment going back in time. It was like looking through a long tube. You only see a little bit. Dad's old cutter pulled out from the shed, scissoring the grasp and crisp, the wet gleam of morning off the tires, swaths laid out in neat rows, and Chief trotting behind, tongue out and happy over this rich earth. I watched him from the rotting fence posts covered in moss. Dad was driving back in time too. I could see it on his leathered skin, his boyish grin, the tilt of his shoulders under his old man work clothes, knowing the grip of the steering wheel and the feel of the bumpy field beneath his feet. We stacked boxes and boxes of apples and pears in the old milk shed until there was barely any room left for spiders, the fruit waiting in fall under the shade of leaves, and the tight purple grapes that popped in your mouth and grew in a vine over top of the roof, shingled in moss, the apple juice in the double boiler hot on the stove with a brown rubber hose pinched off like an umbilical cord, or frozen in slices, the bags filling our 12-foot freezer. They came steaming out of the oven in winter, large pans of plots covered in brown sugar. Nothing was wasted as Mum stood at the kitchen counter, carefully cutting the bad bits off a softened apple she got from the shed, telling me again how her dad in the prairies would sometimes buy a few BC apples, cut them in quarters for his daughters, and hold out such goodness in his trembling hand. Every spring, our garden would turn to gumbo in the rain, so Lonnie and Robert and I would go into the muck in our black rubber boots, more and more clay sticking onto our feet with each step, pretending we're on a different planet. Careful, man, don't fall on your ass. When I was just 6, I hammered as many nails as I could into rows, into a block of wood down in the basement. This was my computer console, my command center. This was the space age. We could go anywhere. The bicycle wheel of my childhood, now a giant space station, spinning, spinning, spinning as it circled the earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Al. And those poems really transport us back to childhood, which is appropriate for a title like Sprocket, I guess, transportation. Next, we'll go to Harold Rhenisch. Harold Rhenisch studied poetry at University of Victoria and has been writing from rural Cascadia for 44 years. He's won 2 Malahat Long Poem Prizes and prizes in 2 CBC poetry competitions. His memoir, The Wolves at Evelyn, won the George Ryga Prize. The Salmon Shanties is his 33rd book, so you can do the math. Pretty impressive world Rhenisch.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. In 1845, a border was put through the middle of our country. But people have been singing to the salmon in this country for 22,000 years. On the Salmon River in Idaho, 13,200 years ago, a mammoth was sacrificed for a community feast in Squim, just across the water. I've only been doing this since 1974. But that year I came to Victoria to become a Shakespearean actor, and I wound up sitting on the point in Beacon Hill Park watching orcas dive and swim around a canoeist in the kelp beds down below. And 2 years later, I was reading Rilke for the first time with the blue sea before me, right there. 2 years later, I was back on the orchard in the Similkameen. And in those years, the poet Theodore Roethke had written about driving out onto the beach at Ocean Shores in Washington until he got stuck. But I had already gone further. I had gone to Gaudier, who had died at Verdun in the First World War. And I had gone to the black huts in the Hebrides where fishers were tying nets out of dried seaweed. This is called Song for the Lovers. It would be great to be sitting again in that picker shack among the peach trees in Coston, to arrive in the night, to turn off in the canary grass, then along the rutted gravel, then fording the creek with a clattering fender, then killing the engine, then the lights, in that order, under Aldebaran, as if you were visiting Solzhenitsyn in exile, as if there were someone at the end of the road, at Grafen's Eyrie, for example, who had words for things and could put the world in order because he had order within him and knew the old dance songs. I was that man stepping out the door into the darkness to greet travelers who had crossed the mountains from the city. To me, the dark wasn't sudden. I lived there. But to them, it was the lifting of the top of the head and finding not the mind and its avenues, but the stars rising to great heights on the black wings of birds. To have a mind you could walk into and pick a peach by feel among black leaves like feathers, that was not something to be given up lightly. But I left it young for the machine gun of free verse that mowed down Gaudier when the world died and the universities were rebuilt in concrete. Now it is late. I find myself telling young poets to run. There are wild bees in the hills who live under the earth, I tell them. They hum and they buzz, they dart and they tremble. They need no maps because they wear them on their skins. The electric touch of the sun waving in fronds of grass in dawn's swells. The kids are yawning. They want to be tweeting to each other. I know that, about celebrating bodies, maps of skin, folding and unfolding, creasing and smoothing out and glistening. Not listening to old farts talking to angels that are simply not there, granted. Although the mind is a fancy, eh? Old men know it isn't. They know it contains mind's quick grass, braided by deft fingers around a black fire, dried like lamb shank and knotted to mind's hook to lure fish from the deep where heart surges in thought's tides and the moon lies on the black bottom blind as her skin. Who should we tell of the fishing, and who on earth would listen? not the young. Their verities are there to protect them from us, granted. And not old men like us drinking the heart's whiskey. And not surely old women, they know us. There is only the world. Rilke's lovers might be fighting to leave it, but someone has to be there with a bowl of plums in the starlight to receive them, to open the door they didn't know they were building, to the bed in the mountain orchard, for them to nest in and make love there. That's all in the making, rarely in the finding or searching, and never in the thinking. While the moon casts the shadows of bats across their limbs, all akimbo, on which are written the true maps of the world. So the next poem is about Cascadia again, this green land spanning the mountains, this land in which the oldest maps are stories of fish and humans coming together in song. This book, the Salmon Shanties, is a map like that. It rewrites Ezra Pound's cantos as if he had stayed home and written about this land when it needed him, instead of him losing his way in Europe. This map is for the poet Charles Lillard of Victoria, who championed working life. His touchstone was the poet Hölderlin, and the poem is called Promise Song. There were eagles riding above the palisades of the Chinook. There was Red's conviction that eagles would ride forever on the unending wind. And there was Heraclitus beside him, who too carried a pack heavy with 120 pounds of nitroglycerin up into the tarns of the Itches, because no mule was sure enough of foot to deliver them, and men were, and their dreams. There was Plato cursing them both with his silence around the campfire in the evening, but thrusting out his blue enamel cup and sharing the bitter cowboy coffee, if we can give a name to the act of reading the earth, as Red did, again and again, brushing the old starlit sands in his breath. A way of speaking neither of this world nor out of it, that was once our Wawa, and was once the sound of the surf breaking against the salt hay around the footings of the sky posts of the big houses at Owakino, that I can hear in my mother and her brother, who picked it up on their stump farm under the Hudson's Bay Glacier. For a long time, I thought you were wrong, Red. I thought eagles would no longer ride the wind, and the wind was no longer unending. I thought that the land and all the words that defined it was dying. I thought that nobody lived there. I was a boy sucking giant ryegrass stuck between my teeth like Huck Finn, yet it was only the words within me that were talking. By the time I was old enough to resist words and listen, you had long ago finished with your basement. I was restless, I'll admit it. Each spring I left Victoria's fields of blue camash for the red glasswort and the candle-fingered rabbit brush. Each fall I came back sunburnt, my skull burnt empty and filled with the earth, stalked like a mask lifted from the shards of Mycenae. I walked along the seafront among Emily's sweet peas, torn smocks, and paint smears, absolutely shattered. A woman I loved then told me it took me to September and October of each year to become civilized. Then it was November, and it was starting to rain. My Athena looked into my eyes and saw the earth there, packed full. It was the future. Sure, I had parents, a windy house under elms, goldfinches, scorpions, yarrow, and bull snakes, but they didn't count. I was raised by trees. Don't get me wrong, it's probably better overall than being raised by mammals, but in Victoria, the oaks lost their terracotta leaf mouths and raked the sky, and all the stars crashed into the strait, where they drowned with a hiss and washed up on Dallas Beach in a white veil of surf, gorse, and the roll, suck, and growl of glacial gravels. Red had come in from a logging show the year before. For him, Victoria was both victory and defeat. I went back to the bush, he said, time and time again, until I realized there was nothing there, only a scrap of local color. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about so many things, and right about more of them. But that first day, he dragged a hand-rolled cigarette butt under his cork-booted heel for an hour on the tide swirls of industrial linoleum because he suddenly realized he needed an ashtray. It was like watching the devil with his one cloven foot and the broken chain hanging from his waist and his switch come down from the Tyrol to the rice farmers of the Po Valley to confer with Ezra before he boarded the train to Rome to harangue the troops once again on Radio Mussolini, or Hölderlin, whispering intimately to gods no one could see but him and declared mad by the keepers of civilization who had already declared themselves to be the ones who were sane. So that's my poem for Red. This next one won second prize in the CBC Poetry Contest. Charles Lillard came from Alaska, and he came to Victoria, and he wrote about Chinook Wawa, the language created by Indigenous women at Fort Vancouver on the Columbia in 1835 out of French, English, and a variety of Indigenous languages in order to talk to their husbands and their children and to weave them into their matriarchal kinship lines. Al Purdy came here from Canada, and he very wisely wrote the poem, Say the Names, to be here. His poem contains a quote from Pat Lane about Similkameen deer in my valley. And in this poem, the poet Linda Rogers is subbing off at the wheel because it's a long journey. This is called Saying the Names Shanty. It was Al who said it. To stick out the thumb's knuckle and nail crooked, to say with a gesture where you want to get along to and see who is going there too, with her hands on the wheel's leather and the rubber taking the curves of the crow's nest, crossing the line from black tar's unwinding ribbon into the riddle of headlights weaving between Similkameen deer and Arcturus. That's where we're all going, isn't it? In the passenger seat, squeak and creak, after being picked up in the rain at Snass Creek. It's you and me and this old Chevy crossing the Cascades, going where the heart beats, which is the one trick it knows well. Heading, as Al put it, to head smashed in Buffalo Jump and whatchamacallit, where I picked choke cherries on the Blackfoot wind and was emptied and filled in the same moment the road is eddying across 1,000 miles, thinking. The Tulameen, Al said in his jack shirt, knocking the road's cap off. The Spilla machine, the Similkameen, tipping it back. It was Al who gave the words for my tomato field in Carameas, beating it out with finger taps on oilcloth in a green painted kitchen. His soul, that is, way out there, driving a Malibu over Anarchist to Greenwood, through the black slag heaps to Grand Forks and east, pushing the fire before him, as he put it, with his foot to the mat, and Stan Rogers riding shotgun, and then Mercy coming on Franklin on the gravel shoulder at Moose Jaw with his thumb out. That's what I'm talking about now to you who are crossing the mountains with me, who are maybe willing to take the wheel when I nod off on that long stretch between Creston and Field, where the pines say the name of the night over and over, and it sounds like the wind talking with two spirits. It is. The road is its own map, not the other way round. And the names it knows us by are the way things keep right on going to right on going. Kasitku and Klitilk with the 1,000 eyes, each a mouth for the sky, and the salt between them the star road. Al is still walking with his thumb out there, his soul's crunching as he runs for our chrome handle. The radio is still catching signals on the bends above Swius and losing them at Midway. There's no figuring the human heart because it has no limbs and no limits. The mountains are echoing Illecillewaet and Chupak, the crackle of gravel from the wheels, bringing us home to the grass tents. There is no map to the powwow that awaits us at Snickakitten. We follow the rain and the light on the mountains long after the beginning has ended, and long before even its ends have unraveled to water, and the click, 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 click clatter of trout's knock under the star's milk, and the flick of the moon in high current, and the cool brush of our hike into the Tuchtulach, to the ones who are waiting to ride us. Not to Belleville this time, not to Al's Canada, but to Skaha and Twichin, that are the sound of the land saying the names that bring us home. Our bones, are singing. Thank you.